from the East Coast. It's another wonderful day here. The sun is out and everything is melting away the snow. It is a beautiful day to be here with all of you. My name is Hua. I am here to read to you part 5 of Lethal Kisses. Parts 1 through 4 can be found in my videos below. And if you have not subscribed yet, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I hope that you have been enjoying the series. Enjoy. Kristen felt her hands were sweaty as she stood in the hallway with her grandfather. Gaylin was a few feet away talking with Scott, and she was pretending to not let his mouthing of "I love you" hit her heart. He sure chose the timing of all to announce that to her soul, but she was thankful for his support. Without him reminding her to look for his eyes in the crowd, she had lost her courage. Scott turned into the restroom hallway, and Gaylin walked toward them with his dark eyes and handsome face. Her heart did a flip, and she tried to not let it show, but it was hard to hide how happy he made her. "You really like him, don't you?" her grandfather said. Kristen turned to look at him. "Why do you say that?" Corin smiled. "Dear, I can see your face light up when he's near you. It's almost impossible to catch. It's just like me when I first saw your grandmother." Smiling, she replied, "I was one that could never hide my feelings." "Gaylin is a good man, Kristen. I watched his father raise him with humility and the greatest of lessons. If anything, the man you should have chosen in the beginning was Gaylin. It's not too late, though, and he will be the one to help you through this." Kristen sighed and took a deep breath. "Let's talk about this another time. My stomach is all twisted with what is going on." Gaylin reached them and immediately took her hand in his to kiss. Kristen let the thoughts of what if and what not go as he pulled her into his arms. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I'm not sure. I'm on edge, if I'm being honest." "Let's go back in," Corin said as the doors to the courtroom opened, noting the jury had come to a decision. As they piled back in, Leonard was brought in to sit at his table. Brandon came in, and so did the jury. Kristen reached out to hold her grandfather's hand. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Brandon asked. An elderly man stood up. "Yes, we have, Your Honor." He handed a note to the bailiff, who brought it to the judge. He opened and looked at it, and then returned it. "In the case of the state versus Leonard Stetter, how does the jury find?" The elderly man stood up again. "In the case of the state versus Leonard Stetter, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty on all charges." Kristen let out a breath and closed her eyes as strong arms engulfed her from behind. She felt the tears squeeze through her eyes, and she stood up hugging Scott and her grandfather. Then she turned and threw her arms around Gaylin. "Order! Order!" Brandon shouted. "Bailiff, please take the defendant away. Your sentencing will be set for 2 weeks from now. Case dismissed." Kristen watched as Leonard's lawyer shook hands with him, and the county bailiff handcuffed him and took him out. As he passed by them, he gave them a sneer, and Kristen felt Gaylin tighten his arm around her. It was over.
The final call in the middle of the night. We sit and watch the stars.
The dry night air was blowing through Kristen's hair as she sat in the balcony looking out over the city lights. She'd had a lot to think about as she put everything together. Leonard was going to be put away. For how long, she wasn't sure yet, but at least it meant she was going to be safe. Safe to move on with her life, safe to be with whoever she wanted. She leaned forward on her knees. She needed to talk to Gaylin about what he'd silently said to her. It weighed heavily on her mind, and while she waited for him to return from changing at his hotel, she figured she'd use this time to set her mind straight. The question was she ready to go forward with Gaylin on this? Her heart was still messed up about certain things, and no matter what she did, One piece would always be missing. Today proved that no matter how far Leonard would be away from her, he still owned a portion of her fear. Could Gaylin remove that from her heart? And then she completely confused herself when she realized he already was removing the fear from her heart. She groaned and shoved the heels of her hands into her eyes, silencing the tears that kept spilling out. She heard the door open and then heard him walk out to join her. But the look she had on her face wasn't a look he had been prepared to be greeted by. He had a dozen roses in his hands and had changed to her favorite casual jeans and t-shirt look, but his eyes held 1,000 questions. Why do I have a feeling this is going to be the start of a conversation I don't want to hear? He asked as he gave her the roses. She thanked him and set them down on the table beside her. He knelt down and took her face in his hands. We already won. What's with the sad face? Gaylin asked. We have to talk. I know we do. I know what you're asking. You're asking about those 3 words, aren't you? She lowered her eyes and then she burst out crying. Why do you love me, Gaylin? What is it about me that makes you want me so much? I'm nothing. Look at me. I'm a huge mess. Correction. You're a hot mess. One I'd like to get into a dirty tangle with. But right now, I'll push that thought out of my mind. He knelt down and took her shoulders. Kristen, would it help you if I explained something to you? Please? He smiled and pulled her to sit down on the ground beside him. I had a woman a while back. She was someone I thought I was going to marry. You never told me that, Kristen said in a shock. I'm telling you now. She stilled and he continued. She and I met at a gala in England for a charity event I supported. She was not only beautiful, but she held all the pieces of my heart that I yearned for in a woman. We worked together so pleasantly, and before long, I was down on one knee asking her to be my fiancée. Kristen felt jealous as she listened, and she made a face. Are you trying to make me hate her? Gaylin laughed. Don't hate her. Yet. He touched her cheek gently. We bought a house together. We were doing the whole thing from buying household materials to choosing wallpaper to designing nurseries. What happened? Gaylin's eyes turned dark. I was played. She made a bet with her friends that if she could get me to marry her within a year, they owed her money. It started out as a bet, she claimed, but it turned into something real for her. I got a hold of her phone one afternoon because it was going crazy with notifications. It kept ringing off the hook. She was in the bathroom changing for the night out with me, and I finally got tired of listening to it ding off and on and off and on, and so I looked at it. Kristen's face dropped. Oh my God. Yeah. Oh my God came from her, and get the hell out came from me. Kristen threw her arms around him and pulled him close to her. She could feel him shaking, and when she pulled away, he had fresh tears brimming in his eyes. My heart hurts for you. He smiled gently. My heart died that day, Kristen. And I thought it would never be able to wake again. Until I met you. You woke up my heart after she killed it. You know, I called my father after I met you, and I told him all about you. He mentioned to me that if you woke something in me, I shouldn't let you go. So this is me, fighting for you to not let anything come between us. What happened to her? I cut her loose. And although she claimed to have fallen in love with me, I didn't believe her. I mean, who could, after all that? How long ago was that? 6 years ago? Kristen's face paled. You mean, you've been... Yes, I've been dead for 6 years, Kristen. Until just now, when you rebirthed life into me. Do you see how important you are to me? I'm the type of man who, when he falls in love, loves until the last breath is being drawn out of him. Until my heart stops beating, I don't let go. I know that you and I are like two different peas in a pod, and our history together would make anyone cringe. But I love you. The attraction I have for you is undeniable, and when we are joined together, baby, it's the most incredible thing in the entire universe. The warmth of you is what I yearn for. And your voice, it's the only thing I want to hear when I wake up in the morning. Give that to me, Kristen. Give it to me. I need it. Kristen let out a sob and leaned in to kiss him. The hunger she felt for him was undeniable, and when he reached out to palm her curves, she knew right away that there was no questioning her emotions toward this man. He came with a dark history, and with her by his side, he was able to erase it. He was willing to fight her battles with her, and that meant he was there for the long run. Gaylin was sitting on a chair, watching Kristen sleep on the bed before him, one arm over her head and one across her belly. Her hair spilled about behind her like a fan, and her legs dangled over the bed, legs that were wrapped around his waist just moments ago. She was sleeping soundly, unafraid of anything to disturb her peace because of him. He finally released the fear of Leonard's trial as soon as he heard the guilty verdict. Leonard would be gone in a way. Now would be the time to focus on winning Kristen and keeping her there forever. Tonight, when he shared his deepest, darkest moments with her, her reaction proved that although she hadn't said she loved him, she truly cared for him. He would start with that because he was willing to wait for her words to come when she was ready. In his heart, he knew what he wanted, and it pointed right to her. The ache he had for her was from a longing deep within that he could not explain. His need to protect her, to love her, to care for her frightened him because he'd never experienced it before. It left him shaking and breathless. He liked it, and he wanted more. In truth, he was completely addicted, and once wasn't going to be enough. It would take a lifetime of drinking up her scent. So while she slept, he went out and did something that he had thought of before, but never had the courage to do. Gaylin watched as she stirred and woke from the deep slumber that took away the exhaustion from her eyes. When she found him sitting on the chair watching her, she laughed and threw a pillow at him, but he caught it with one hand and set it aside. She was a joy to watch, and he was feeling incredibly proud that she was going to be his. "You are such a creep," she said as she sat up and ran her hands through her hair and yawned the sleep off. She rubbed her eyes, and then her entire body froze. She removed her hands slowly and stared at them, noticing the large diamond on her left hand. She looked up at him, and her eyes were filled with questions. "What is this?" she asked. He shrugged. "What does it look like?" Kristen bit her lower lip. "It looks like an engagement ring." "Well, gee, you should open it up first," he joked. He moved from the chair to the edge of the bed and took her hand. I think it fits you very well. She pulled her hand free. Gaylin, did you... You're supposed to get an answer first, before you put this ring on me. So I'm a little bit unorthodox. Sue me. Kristen's face paled, and then she laughed out loud. This is so surreal. He was frightened at her reaction. What's wrong? Talk to me, sweetheart. She moved out of his reach and stood up. It's so fast. I mean, I just put Leonard in jail, and now I'm getting engaged? Isn't that going to look bad? Gaylin stood up. The case is over. And besides, the jury knew you and I were together already. What does it matter? It's too fast. We hardly know each other. We can know each other after marriage. Why, Gaylin? Why the sudden rush to marriage? He took her elbow and gently pulled her toward him. He sat down on the bed, and she curled on top of his lap. I love you, Kristen. I don't care about how long or how short time has been. All I know is that with you by my side, I am a better man. I feel better when you are around me, and everything I do is successful. Tell me that is not reason enough to ask you to marry me. She smiled, and he couldn't help but steal a kiss at the corner of her mouth. The kiss turned into something more, and when he reached for the hem of her shirt, she backed away and stood up. So, what about living arrangements? She asked. Well, I know normally you move in with a guy, but if you want to stay here, I can move in. You do that for me. He stood up and reached for her hands. Honey, have you no idea what I do just to keep you? I'm ready to beg right now just to get everything my way. Kristen smiled and looked at her ring. I love it. It's beautiful, really. Okay, then say yes and make me the happiest man on earth. Give me that much, will you? Leaning back, she replied, yes. Engaged, Corwin said over dinner, as Kristen flashed her grandfather the ring Gaylin had given her. More like placed on her finger, if she was being honest. She remembered when she woke up and froze, staring at the ring. At first she thought he had been joking, until she saw the dead serious look in his eyes when she found his gaze. Throughout the entire day, he'd held her close, kissed her nonstop, and been trying her new name, Kristen Amethyst. They'd broken the news to her grandfather just shortly after arriving, and although he wasn't surprised, he was still startled at the thought of her getting married. I had an inkling, her grandfather said. I sort of knew it would happen. Call it an old man's guess. Besides, I know how the Amethysts work. Gaylin smiled and brought his wineglass up. Cheers, Corwin. Have you called your parents? Corwin asked. No, not yet. We figured we'd tell you first and then tell them both at another time. Besides, I was thinking I might just fly us there to visit them and break the news then. Corwin laughed. That'd give your dad some good memories to cherish for years. Corwin's phone rang and he excused himself to answer. Kristen turned around to find Gaylin reaching for her and then heard her grandfather's angry voice from the other room. When he re-entered, Kristen stood up, watching her grandfather's face break into a pale white expression. Grandfather? What's wrong? She asked. Leonard made bail. He's out free until sentencing. What? Gaylin said as he stood up, suddenly knocking over his chair. When? Just as her grandfather opened his mouth to speak, she heard the screeching sound of tires outside her grandfather's house and a round of shots fired through. Gaylin shoved her down to the ground as he watched her grandfather crouch over. She screamed, and Gaylin covered her body as the rounds of fire continued for another few moments before the car drove away. Grandfather, she cried as she pushed Gaylin away and ran to turn him over. Blood soaked through his shirt as he looked up at her with hollow, dry eyes. No, she cried as she wrapped her arms around him. She was fighting Gaylin as he tried to pull her away. No, leave me be. Baby, we need to get up and go now. I'll call the cops, but we need to leave now. No, I'm not leaving him. She screamed as Gaylin picked her up and threw her over his shoulders, and she watched as her grandfather lay still with a blank recorded message of her small, happy moment before bullets took his life. How is it not possible it's not Leonard's doing? He made bail, and then suddenly my fiancé's grandfather's house is ripped to shreds with bullets. Tell me this is just an ordinary coincidence you deal with on a daily basis, detective. Gaylin sneered at the man in front of him. Hours later, at the police station, they were still stuck without an answer. Corwin's body had been picked up by the medical team and was now at the city morgue. Gaylin knew he should have killed Leonard when he had the chance. Perhaps then this wouldn't have happened. He turned to find Kristen sitting outside the detective's office with a thick gray blanket around her shoulders. She had a lifeless look in her eyes as she stared off into the walls. He turned his attention back to the detective, who had introduced himself as Jerry Collin. An oversized belly hung before him as he sat in an ugly gray suit with a receding hairline. Mr. Amadeus, I realize this is not something you want to hear right now, but without evidence, we cannot bring him in. We did contact him, and he's got a solid alibi with a witness that can put him where he states he was. That's bullshit, and you know it. I know you're upset, but right now, why don't you let us do our job, and you go take care of your fiancé? Gaylin knew Jerry was right. He shoved himself out of the chair and walked out to find Kristen still lost in a staring contest with the walls. He sat down and gently reached out to put his arms around her. She flinched, and then when realizing it was him, sank into his hold. Her shoulders shook, and he heard her gut-wrenching sob. She turned and threw her arms around him, pouring her cry into his arms. Each time her body shook, it gutted him, and he had no words to relieve her of her pain. She pulled away, and he reached out to wipe her tears. What did the detective say? She asked. He shook his head gently. There's nothing they can do, because Leonard has a strong alibi with a witness to support him. I'm sorry. Kristen's face broke. I know it was him. Who else would it be? And why were we not told about him making bail? The law sucks. Kristen ran her hands through her hair and sighed deeply. I have no one now. I'm literally all alone. Hey, he said, and she turned to look at him. You have me. I'm not going anywhere. Yes, but you can one day stop loving me. He was the one person in the whole world who would love me no matter what would happen. This put a hole in his heart, and he took her hands. Kristen, stop. Although I'm not your blood, I will become your husband. That means I'm going to protect you until eternity. Give me your trust and believe in me when I say that I love you and that nothing can stop me from giving all my love to you. The only thing that will stop me is when my heart stops beating, and even then I'll still be around you in some form. She broke into a sob and wrapped her arms around him. I'm sorry. I'm just scared. He was my home. Gaylin put his hand on her head and kissed her temples, and then brought her lips to his. I'll be home from now on. I'll be the place of comfort for you. Whatever you desire, I'll give it to you. I'll make you my everything. Don't push me away. Not now, Kristen. I myself have loved Corwin too, and my heart breaks that he had to go that way. But I promise that I will get him justice, and I will find the man responsible for this if I have to go to the end of the world. I promise you that whatever you need, I'll give it to you. Tell me what you need." She looked at him with trembling lips. "I need to know that I'm not going to be used as before, and that I will never have to go through this again." Gaylin cupped both hands around her face. "I promise you. Now give me what I need." "What is that?" "Give me your trust," he said gently. Thank you for tuning in to part 5. The final installment of Lethal Kisses will be uploaded tomorrow. I hope that you are enjoying the story. Peace and healing.